Welcome to Advent of Tessellations 2025. My name is Madonna Yoder, and you're joining hundreds of folders around the world on this 25-day journey into the infinite world of repeating patterns folded from a single sheet of paper. You'll discover many different twists in this challenge, building up to advanced patterns with flagstone motifs of trapezoid twists. Welcome to day 22 of Advent of Tess 2025, where we're folding this pattern that I named Hallelujah Mountains for the floating mountains in the Avatar movie. The one with the blue aliens, not the one with the Fire Nation. So let's go ahead and start folding. It's going to be real similar to yesterday, a lot of the same twists, but that hexagon twist is on the back of the paper. So I'm going to start by flipping my paper over, like if I have a preference for which side is front. This is going to be the front, and I'll flip over to start with the closed hexagon twist. So like all the rest of our closed hexagon twists, if we want it to be in the center, our mountain folds are going to go to the corners of the paper, and the valley folds will go one space above that. And I'll go around and put in all 6 of these pleats before we can squash our hexagon twist. And once those 6 pleats are in place, and you've brought your hexagon down to 2 spaces above the table, then we can grab that hexagon. So I like to say bop it and grab it, give it a sharp twist. It'll often look a little crumpled, but we can smooth it out and get it to all lay flat. The important thing is that we've twisted all the way around and can have our mountain folds going straight all the way to the corners of the hexagon. From here, we'll flip the paper over, and now it's time to add in our new trapezoid twists. So we are using basically the same spacing as yesterday, but with the hexagon on the other side, it's going to feel more condensed on this side of the paper. So I'm going to put my valley fold of the double depth plate of the trapezoid one space above the existing folded mountain. And that mountain, since it's the double depth plate, is going to be 2 grid spacings away. Then I'm going to extend that mountain all the way back across the paper. I'm going to fold through an existing pleat, making an overlap. And for setting up this trapezoid, I have my first point of the open hexagon puffy star, and then the second one is just above this mountain fold that goes straight through. And I can find that 3rd single depth pleat. And once all of my pleats are laid out, and remember, even though we started with what looked like tube pleat spacing, this is a double depth pleat, so we will have 1 grid space laying on top of the existing folded pleat. And we can press to squash. Now I'm going to continue around clockwise just like yesterday, but unlike yesterday, we'll see that the folds are maybe not as cooperative as they were the day before. And I can start by lifting up the single depth plate under the trapezoid to make it easier to draw on my double depth plate. And now when I go to extend this double depth plate back through, it hits in the middle of my previous trapezoid twist. And there's not much that I can do about this. I can try to do a wrap, but that still leaves it 3D. So what I'm going to do is keep the previous twist folded and fold through that previous trapezoid. Conveniently, the grid lines on the inside line up with the grid lines on the outside, so I don't have to add any new folds. And when I add my remaining direction of single depth pleat for the new trapezoid twist, this will cause a pleat overlap with the double depth pleat of that previous trapezoid. And I can press to squash. I might have to be a little extra careful because one end of my trapezoid is laying on top of more layers than the other. You saw that that caused a little wrinkle in my paper, which I picked up and smoothed out with my fingers before smoothing everything with the bone folder. This would be a good time to check out the tiling diagram, which I have in the downloads available. If you're signed up for the email reminders at training.gatheringfolds.com/advent, then you'll get all of those reminders. And what we can see here is that we've got our hexagon, we've got trapezoids connected to the hexagon, we've got more trapezoids resolving the pleat overlaps between the double depth pleat of the first trapezoid and the middle single depth pleat of the second. And then we have these triangles resolving the overlaps between these other single depth pleats from the first and second types of trapezoids. What I can see here is that by putting in this first trapezoid next to the hexagon, I've already covered all of this distance, and that if I fill in this darker trapezoid and the two triangles between these two lighter trapezoids, I'm not creating any bumps sticking out further than the initial two trapezoids. So this is a good candidate for going ahead, flipping over, resolving the pleat overlap, because I'm not starting any new layers. I'm not having anything stick out past the boundary that I've already set for myself. So coming back to the paper, I'm now going to flip over and open my pleat overlaps and make sure as I do that, that I'm restoring the trapezoid on the other side to its full folded state. And then I'm going to use this double depth pleat and this single depth pleat to create a new trapezoid twist. So the double depth pleat, the mountain, becomes the mountain of the middle single depth pleat. And then I need a third single depth pleat to finish the trapezoid. Then I have this other pleat over here, and we're going to do the exact same thing that we did yesterday, which is put in a three-way intersection of mountains so that these two mountain folds, the mountain of the first single depth pleat and the mountain of the three-way intersection that we're setting up, have one grid space between them. And then we'll do a triangle wrap, which causes the third single depth pleat to add on to the triangle wrap and make a double depth pleat. And I can let this three-way intersection of mountains lay down flat while I squash the new trapezoid twist. And then flip open, and I can reach under here. It's a double depth pleat, so I have plenty of space, and squash the closed triangle twist. From here, I'll flip back to the other side and turn the triangle wrap into a closed triangle twist. Notice with this double depth pleat, I'm just flipping over one grid spacing worth and keeping the same mountain fold. So now I have all of the twists folded in between my two previous trapezoid twists. Now I'll rotate again. I'll lift this single depth pleat above the tip of the previous trapezoid. I will have a valley fold, one grid spacing out from the folded mountain, a mountain fold, two spaces further out than that. This is the double depth pleat. And when I extend the mountain of that double depth pleat back through, I'm running through almost every single twist that I just folded. But that's fine because they're all aligned. The grid inside the twist is aligned with the grid outside because these are open trapezoids and closed triangles. And I'm just going to run that pleat through and create a new pleat overlap and press to squash. So typically I say you want to avoid running pleats through existing twists, but there's some situations where you have to. Then I'll flip the paper over, open up that overlap, and find my double depth pleat. So one of the things to look for here is that this single depth pleat mountain hits the double depth pleat and we get a point of the puffy star, and then we get the next point sitting underneath. And we can see one grid spacing from the corner of the trapezoid underneath to where my new mountain fold of the third single depth pleat is going. Very similar to some of the patterns that we've folded recently. And then I'm setting up the three-way intersection of mountain folds so that these two mountain folds are one grid spacing apart. And this middle single depth pleat is going to wrap under. So instead of the mountain fold continuing on the same grid line as the mountain fold of the double depth pleat, the mountain is going to change direction and go down into the three-way intersection of valley folds for the triangle wrap. And this triangle wrap is going to add an extra space to the existing third direction of single depth pleat, making it a double depth pleat. And just like we saw with yesterday's pattern, you do want to make sure that your triangle wrap is not catching on the trapezoid on the other side. Mine was just there, and I was feeling that things didn't want to fold flat. So definitely check that if your paper is trying to bunch up on you. And then we can press to squash. And squash the closed triangle twist as well. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, if we're folding through existing twists going this way, why don't we go the other way? And we can try that. Particularly, I would want to try that from this side of the paper. So I have the potential of squashing the next trapezoid flat. Let's see what happens if I do that. I notice that I have these tube pleats, well, what looks like tube pleats, 2 spaces between a mountain here and the mountain going in from the double depth pleat of this triangle, or sorry, trapezoid. And so I would expect the same spacing over here, where I would have that double depth pleat passing back through. And remember, double depth pleat, I need 2 spaces between parallel mountain and valley folds. And then I can arrange the rest of my trapezoid twist. Here I still have that pleat coming over the top, so I can get rid of it with the triangle setup and triangle wrap. And make sure that the other side is happy, which it was not. And press to squash. And squash the triangle, then flip over and squash the triangle on the other side. Looks like I had not squashed this triangle over here earlier, so I'll go ahead and do that now. And then I can continue with this pleat overlap, which should be the double depth pleat and one of the single depth pleats of my new trapezoid, and it is indeed. So I can set up the third pleat, I can run the mountain of the double depth pleat back through, make it single depth, and squash my new trapezoid twist. And then I think regardless of what I do, I'm going to end up sending pleats through existing twists at this point. But I can start by coming over here, sending my double depth pleat back through. It looks like it's going to go through existing twists. I can take 1 grid spacing off it by doing a wrap, but that doesn't really change anything. So I'll leave it as an overlap. Lots of layers over here. And I've got from the mountain of the double depth pleat, I've got the mountain of the single depth pleat. And I'm finding my third single depth pleat as well. And then opening up this pleat on top to put in the triangle and triangle wrap. I'll lay the triangle down flat while I squash the trapezoid twist, and then squash the trapezoid. And this is getting me fewer layers than I was working with before. And flipping over, I'll squash the triangle that was wrapped and open up this overlap to squash the trapezoid on the other side. Now I know that some of you stuck to the first order of doing things. And so I'm going to do the rest of the pattern as if this was my first trapezoid and I've been working my way around. So that probably assumes that I have air folded this trapezoid, because this pleat would be going right under it, and then somehow probably ignored and squashed things in that area without considering this pleat, and just being very gentle and letting it be 3D in this area. But we'll continue with this trapezoid twist next. So I'm going to pop, okay. Actually, let's see what happens if I try to do the trapezoid behind here next. Flipping over, I've got my double depth pleat. I know that the corner of the twist needs to come right up against the next pleat over. So this is going to be a valley fold, and this will be a mountain in there. And I'm coming up against this pleat that I don't want to keep folded. So I'm going to do a compound wrap around that pleat. Then there's this other pleat that really wants to cause issues. Ooh, is that how it's going to work? Okay. Cool. The paper tells you what it wants. So what was going on is that I had this existing pleat, and I want to put my new pleat through here. I don't want to keep the existing pleat while my new pleat is folded. So I'm going to pop this down. And what I noticed is that the first zig of the compound wrap I was going to do is connecting on the same grid line as this existing pleat that I didn't know how I was going to deal with. So I'm going to let those connect, let it fold all the way up under this other pleat, and I'm going to let the valley of the old pleat carry on through. And I'm going to let the mountain of the compound wrap carry through, and the valley here and the mountain are 2 grid spaces apart. Then I'm going to find the mountain of my double depth pleat. I'm going to have a valley 1 space above that, so these are becoming an accordion pleat. I'm going to lift up the 3rd mountain fold. So got to keep that valley in place if I want the trapezoid to set up. And I can magic the trapezoid into place, even though there was a pleat that was going to pass through before the twist even started. So when you listen to the paper, sometimes it tells you some really interesting things. And then I can press to squash. And I think the paper is telling me to do the trapezoid on the other side next. Not 100% sure, but we'll find out. Possibly. I see air folding in the future if I try to squash this next trapezoid. Let's see what's in the future if I try to do the 6th trapezoid on this side. So that would mean opening up sending a double depth pleat back through this way. I've got that tube pleat spacing between the mountain folds. This trapezoid is going to sit here. And I've got these other pleats hanging out. It kind of wants to triangle wrap, but that's not good enough to get this area flat. So what I'm going to do is with this trapezoid, I do need the triangle and triangle wrap to lay that area down without the extra pleat coming through. And let's see, that only gets 1 grid spacing worth. I do that, that's not flat. But I'm not convinced that this area can be flat. So what I'm going to do is get everything as flat as it can be. So I'm holding this pleat closed in particular as I press in the air my trapezoid twist. And I'm holding underneath, directly under these places where I'm pressing, like this. And so I can get that trapezoid roughed in before I flip over and set up my next trapezoid twist, which has the double depth pleat coming through here. I've got that mountain fold that would be heading out in this direction, but because we need to put in a triangle above and triangle wrap below, that mountain is going to head off in another direction to enable so notice here I've got these 2 3-way intersections of mountains, 1 grid spacing apart. This mountain that was detoured is going underneath. Another cue here is that these 2 mountain folds, so the one coming off of this 3-way intersection and the one coming from the trapezoid below, are 1 grid spacing apart. And that gets me the rest of the trapezoid. So it doesn't look like a very healthy trapezoid until it's squashed. And then I can squash both this triangle that I just set up and the triangle that was wrapped when I set up the last trapezoid. And then flipping over, there is the triangle that I just set up and the triangle that I set up with the last trapezoid to squash. But at that point, once we have 6 trapezoids and 6 triangles on both sides of the paper, then the pattern is complete. So that is Hallelujah Mountains. And let's take a quick look at the backlighting. It's got these flagstone mountain motifs, and there's a variety of ways to repeat this pattern, which you can find in the Advent of Tess 2025 ebook, including a way that takes these little mountains and combines them into great big meta triangles. So that's a really cool option when it comes to this pattern's repeats. And getting the lighting to show that well is a particular challenge today, apparently. But you can repeat that in the same tiling with a different position of symmetry further out. And the difference between these is whether you put the closed triangle in the position of symmetry on the same side as the hexagon or the same side as those mountains. That is the difference between these two patterns. And then you can take the same kind of pattern and same center at least, and use it in another tiling. And this one has another hexagon position. It actually makes a flagstone pattern of rhombus and trapezoid twists that's like has a continuous flagstone path. It does have some gaps like around the hexagon and where those trapezoids on the other side are, but it makes a continuous flagstone path, including these giant hexagon outlines. So all 3 of these are patterns that you could fold based on what you know now. Taking the pattern that we just folded and folding it with more repeats. These are all in the Advent of Tess 2025 ebook, and you can get that at gatheringfolds.com, origamiusa.org, or origamishop.com. You can also learn more about folding these advanced patterns in Tessellation Academy at training.gatheringfolds.com, and learn more about designing your own tilings in advanced twist techniques, also at training.gatheringfolds.com. So happy folding, everyone. I hope to see what you have folded. Go ahead and tag me on Instagram at Gathering Folds. Facebook also works, and so does my personal or my private Discord server, which you can get access to when you sign up for emails at training.gatheringfolds.com. So that is all for today's pattern. Tomorrow we get a bit of a break. We get to step down in difficulty. We actually have another pattern where all the twists are on the same side. They're overlapping each other a bit, but with the double depth pleats, that is not such a problem. So we get to step down in terms of how many twists are folded. There's 3 things that happen 6 times around and 1 in the center, whereas today's pattern had 4 things happening 6 times around. And it's going to set us up for those last 2 days of Advent of Tess this year. So happy folding, and I'll see you tomorrow.